I'm George M. Johnson. I am New York Times bestselling author of the book All Boys Aren't Blue and the author of the newest book, Flamboyants, which I'm super excited to put into the world. Right next to me is the amazing, incredible Charlie Palmer. Charlie is somebody who, well, first of all, he did the book cover for All Boys Aren't Blue. So the iconic cover comes from Charlie. Which is interesting because I learned about why it's important to have a lawyer, and and I learned about how rights work. Because it's like I own the name All Boys Aren't Blue. Macmillan owns the typography of All Boys Aren't Blue, but Charlie owns the image. And so that is why there are no sweatshirts. Because I cannot put the book cover on a sweatshirt until me and Charlie actually
We'll work it out.
talk to each other and have an actual licensing agreement because he created such an iconic cover. But he did the illustrations for Flamboyants, which came out so beautifully. And we're just excited to be here tonight. We're gonna talk for a few minutes, and then we'll do audience Q&A. I think the most important thing for me tonight was just to say like why I wrote the book Flamboyance. Since 2021, I've been getting banned. All Boys Are Blue has been banned in it is banned in Michigan. Sometimes. Right. Sometimes I get to places I'm like, oh wait, I'm banned here too. It is banned. Primarily Dearborn is where my bans has started. And it's interesting sometimes, right? Because I remember when I got banned in Dearborn, some people wanted me to fight against the book bans, but also be anti-black, anti-brown, and fight against myself. And so some of the people who wanted the book ban were also Palestinian. And I just remember when a news article came out about the book bans, and I just remember being contacted and being told to go against Palestinians or being told that, hey, you shouldn't be on the side of your own people because some of your own people want to ban your book. And that's been the hardest part about the book bans. I have had to fight my own community at times because I do know black people could also be homophobic, black people could be misogynistic, black people could be sexist. And this was one of the states where it came like, I guess what they say, like your chickens come home to roost. This was one of those states where like it came full circle with like I'm fighting for, or at times I find myself fighting for people who don't fight for me. But in doing so, I know that sometimes we just don't know each other enough to know the war that we're in, to know the fight that we're in, to know the battle that we're in. Part of my fight had to be like what was going on in Florida. It was like when they banned Black History, when they started banning DEI, the first thing they came for was gay rights, the Don't Say Gay bill. And I had to be at the forefront of that. And I had to really, really fight with my own community to be like, yo, if they attack me, they're going to attack you too. Like at some point when they come for me, they're going to come for you. And then when they came for you, it was like, wait, no. It was okay when you came for them, but you can't come for me. And I was like, that's why I told you our fight is tethered. Is intertwined. And so Flamboyance was birthed from that. It was birthed from the fact that, well, listen, they came for me. And once I started doing the history and the research, that's when I realized they erased you. And Flamboyance is about those people who was erased. The people who I didn't know should have been my heroes. The people who I didn't know should have been the people I got to look up to, that I followed, that I should have been able to love. And I tell everybody, like, we knew Martin Luther King, we knew Malcolm X, we should have known Marsha P. Johnson. There were 3 M's we should have known in the civil rights movement. And there's a reason we don't know Marsha P. Johnson. And so Flamboyance was literally me trying to give that back to the community that always existed, that I never got to exist in because I was denied the access and the ability to live within.
I'm gonna say something. But is my mic working?
Yep.
I'm not gonna say very much because I just paint pictures. But I also love this person, and I think in so many ways he's so courageous. Brer Rustin is another example of someone who was absolutely brilliant and was not afraid. And like I always say, like one of my favorite heroes is James Baldwin. And I always asked once I discovered. I mean, I'd heard the name forever, but I wondered why in literature classes we were never introduced to him. And so I didn't really start reading his work until I was 35, 40 years old and said, oh my God, he's brilliant. A person that's in this book, Elaine Locke. I'd heard the name and I always thought Elaine Locke was a female. And once I started reading his work, I'm like, he's brilliant. What is going on here? And so that whole idea is like I love what you're saying, George, about the idea that you have to fight. When I asked you, even last night, it's like, why do you feel you have to fight? Because there's so many people coming at you from all different directions. And that is like at times something that I just pull back. And there's no expression, it's like choose your fights. But you have them coming from everywhere. And I don't know if you choose them. I think they all come and you fight them all. So it's like they are very courageous. They're very brilliant. They're inspirational. I can tell you when I was approached to do All Boys Are in Blue, we shared the same editor. And I'm like, I always need to have a personal or some kind of connection who the author is. When I have a lot of children books that I've illustrated, and so I want to read the manuscript. Can I see the images? And so I had never heard of George before then. And so I immediately went to YouTube, social media and everything, and I'm seeing him in all these interviews. And I'm like, they are so amazing. They are so bold and articulate and fearless. I'm like, I'm in. And that's kind of how I move. I move from an emotional standpoint. I'm fortunate to be in a place in my life where I take on only projects I can connect with. I turn down projects when I can't see it or I can't feel it. And so, I mean, and having a chance also to actually read the book, like the very first thing that caught me was because Langston Hughes is a good example of someone that I absolutely love. And so I'm reading it, and then it's over with too quickly. But I'm like, give me more. But then he also said something, and I may have sent you an email or something on it, and it was like you had said something and said that's perfect, and it was, I'm giving you enough information that you will want to learn more on your own, which encourages young people to read. And so I know there was a thought that must have taken place when you were doing it.
Yeah, one of the most, I guess the biggest thing I was nervous about was, so I look at each book like an album. And so I look at my books like, what is Billboard going to say? What is Pitchfork going to say? What is the source going to say? Like, I look at my book like an album. And I knew the reviews were going to come. And my biggest fear was like, did I write enough? Like, because I could have written more. But it was like there was a conscious choice made to say, this is enough because I want you to go explore. The same way I went and explored these people, I want you to take your time to go explore. And does anybody know what Goodreads is? Okay, good. Goodreads is a website, and it is owned by Amazon.com. And people get to make reviews. And it's like the largest review. It's like the largest review website of the people. But there are a lot of people on Goodreads who make some really, really hard reviews. And so if your book is going to do well, Goodreads is a place where you could kind of gauge what's going on. And it's like you can kind of gauge what's going on, and you also could be like, oh no, these are a bunch of haters. One of the earliest reviews was like, I felt it was too short. And then there was also another review that came right under it was like, I wanted more, but I understand why George made the choice to make it digestible, because we live in a country where the attention span has shortened, and this is the perfect book to give you just enough to go out and do it on your own. And so that was like the medium that I was kind of living in, was, do I write a full, because All Boys Are Blue is 320 pages. So it's not that I can't write a book that's over 300 pages. This had to be a conscious choice. And I was like, when I thought about the Harlem Renaissance itself, we talk about it like it was a period that lasted 40 or 50 years. The Harlem Renaissance really was only 10 years, because the Great Depression hit in 1929. So it really started around 1919. And by 1929, 1930, that was it, because the country changed, the economy changed. So we're really just talking about a 10-year period where all of these prominent figures really, really grew. So it's not, it's a lot to write about and not enough to write about at the same time. And so it was trying to find that happy medium. And I think that between the poetry, the essays, the illustrations, we were able to kind of make like this perfect book that, because it's like, it's a coffee table book that's not a coffee table book. It's like, if you look at it, it's like the cover, the illustrations, it's gorgeous. And people are like, oh, it's like a coffee table book. And I'm like, right, but it's not. Because it's longer than a coffee table book, but it's shorter than a novel. I don't know what it would be, but it is something that came from my mind, and this is what I wanted. And I did make the conscious decision to say, it's not going to be too long, it's not going to be too short, it's going to be just right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Isn't that Goldilocks?
No.
Is that Goldilocks?
So one of the things that George shared,
the porridge.
One of the things that you shared yesterday that I'm really, really curious about is, at one point during the process of editing, you said you totally rewrote the book. Did you totally rewrite, or did you change a lot? There's a total rewrite and there's changes. Did you totally rewrite?
I rewrote the book. Okay. This book went through 7 edits. When we got to the 4th edit, I probably could find the email. When I got to the 4th edit, it was like, well, it's done, but it's like, your magic is missing. Like, it wasn't said like that, but I knew it was missing, and we felt it was missing. It got very biographical at one point. And so we got to that 4th edit, and it was like, it's done. But something, like, the thing that makes All Boys Are Blue magic is not in this. And I went back and was like, I'm going to have to rewrite this whole book. And that's what I did. Like, I rewrote it. Like, the way I wrote it, the way I thought about it, the way I envisioned it, we just totally rewrote it. And at that time, I'm not even sure if we had contacted you yet. I'm like, because that also was part of what I wanted from the beginning, was you. And I think it just took us a while to get to the place where it was like, I need all of these pieces to come together to get this out of my mind. And then once I knew we had you, once I felt comfortable with the writing, and then we got your sketches, it just was like, yep, this is it. This is exactly what I saw in my mind. Right. Which is hard, because sometimes I think a lot of us, we envision things that we know we want in the world, but it's hard to figure out how do we manifest them. This was one of those books where it had to be manifested, but it had to be like something that, because it was something that I've never seen before myself, I was like, I'm going to have to fight really hard, and I'm going to have to figure this out. How do I get the thing in my head into the world? And fortunately, you were able to, because I can draw a little bit. I can draw just a little bit. But I was like, well, I see what I want, but I can't draw it. But I also can't explain to you how to make this what I want it to be, because you're the illustrator, I'm not. But those first sketches came in, and I was like, oh, that's what's been in my head the whole time. And I was like, I'm grateful that you were able to pull the thing out of my head that I couldn't explain. Right. But I think because I saw what you did with All Boys Are Blue, it it just let me know that yes, you're the person who I know can mirror my words with the illustrations, right? It's like if a picture is worth 1,000 words, you're the person who can read those 1,000 words and make the picture.
Okay. All right. So I have two questions. One, like first of all, you have to. He really, they. I got to get used to the.
It's okay. Listen,
Really,
I always say,
really,
as long as you don't say it disrespectful, my pronouns are they, them. Every now and then, a person tried to disrespect me by using the wrong pronoun.
Right. Mm-hmm.
When you don't say it disrespectfully, I'm good because
Right.
I just know I'm a reflection of so many people. Right. So I appreciate anybody who just is like, oh, even if you go back and forth, it's like, 'cause my mother go back and forth. It's like,
yeah. So I'm working on it.
Yeah,
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Was two things happened. One, when George told me what he wanted to do, I'm like, they don't do that. Yes. He's like, I want to do this. I want you to do. I'm like, no publisher is going to agree to that.
Right.
So it's like, but if you make it happen, I'm ready for it. Right. So I really appreciated that, and I saw it, and then we've talked already. Molly's here with the publisher, and she represents them to some. But one of the things I said to her is like, when I saw the book, I was like, oh my God, this designer. And I said, I want to get that person's information because they did such a fantastic job of weaving it all together. But one of the questions I'm having to you is that when reading the book, you break the third wall a lot. Yeah. Was it always there, or because that was part of it that made it seem more like George? Is that you're talking to them? You're almost turning to the camera and said, "Can you believe that mess?" Yeah. And so was that something that? Was that the voice in the beginning, or was that something that came later on?
That was something that came later on. I felt like it was necessary that I had to almost speak to them like they were still here, or speak to them like the same way I still talk to my grandmother. Nanny passed away 5 years ago, but I still talk to her regularly. And I still talk out loud to her. I still speak out loud to her. I still talk to some of my other ancestors who passed away in a very out loud voice. Sometimes I pray to them, but sometimes I be like talking to them. If anybody knows what I've been dealing with my family for the last 48 hours, I have been talking to my grandmother a lot the last 48 hours. But I've also been talking to my mother a lot the last 48 hours, who my mother is still alive, and she's about to carry. So, so I'm just like, my mother's about to call a certain person in my family, and she's about to carry. But the decision to write the book the way I wrote the book was to break that wall where it was like, I want to. People will often ask you if you could have dinner with somebody dead or alive, who would it be, right? And it's like, okay, but like, what is it like to write it in a book? To have dinner with these people in a book? And that's what I felt I was doing. I was like, I'm going to speak to them like they're still here at times, because to me, in reading about them, they are still here. Their legacy is still here. Their presence is still here. Many of the things that they contributed are still here. And I want to talk to you because some of the things that you did are still affecting me today, but some of the things you did, I'm still learning from today. And so I just wanted to talk to them in that fourth wall voice, third wall voice that gave like credence to the fact that it was like, let's talk to them like in the present, because they're still in the present.
All right. So you brought up something else. Now I'm curious about. If you were to choose from all that you wrote about, who would you have dinner with? One. If you were to choose one, which of those would you want to have dinner with?
Even though a lot of people say she was mean, but Zora Neale Hurston would be who I wanted to have dinner with. Now, a lot of people say she was mean. Okay. But I would still want to have dinner with her. I think that her work in anthropology was just it is so important. She, in many ways, reminds me of like a Ida B. Wells. Even though we know what let's be clear, Ida B. Wells really, the reason we have black journalism is because of Ida B. Wells. But the reason we also have like just the black lexicon is because of Zora Neale Hurston. So I think the two of them, even though they weren't during the exact same era, but they were kind of technically during they were. Well, let me think about it. They were during the same era. I think the two of them together, even if they don't get the same respect uh for what they did for writing, just as black folks, um, Zora Hurston realistically did the work that got a lot of like I there wouldn't be a Flamboyance, I wouldn't be an author without a Zora Hurston. And so I think there are a lot of people in the book that it's like, yes, they laid a path for me and they paved the road for me, but I do not think that like any of this would exist if Zora wasn't there. Like if some of them weren't there, I might be like, oh well, this person could have did this and this person may have did that. But Zora Hurston, if you take her out of what it means to be a black writer, then I don't know if we have as many black writers. And what she had to fight through and what she fought for and what she kept alive, I just would love to sit with her and talk to her about that.
Okay. All right, so I have another question. So I provided a lot of the artwork for the book, but I had designed a specific cover, and was very excited about my cover until I was notified by the publisher that they wanted to change the cover, and I was really upset with that idea until I saw the cover, and I'm like, I love it.
So open the book. Go to the second page.
And that's the original cover?
That's the original book cover.
But when they sent me, they said, would you mind if we explore some different... I'm like, I like my cover.
So that's the original book
cover. The actual cover. And I'm like, oh my God, I love that cover. And that was a really great experience for me because I absolutely love collaboration. I love working with other creative people. And that's what we're talking about. We have a fantastic manuscript.
Yeah.
Right? And then we have my art, and then we have, like we were talking about before, a designer that took these two elements and wove them together in a way that really made for what I think is an absolutely beautiful book.
So I saw the original book cover and I loved it. But we also had a fear that it read too biographical because it was gorgeous, but it was like, which kind of goes into the decision making that you have to do with a book title, a book cover. It's like, will this make people grab it off a shelf? And I remember seeing it with some of the people upside down, and I was like, this is gorgeous. But they also sent me Josephine Baker's image, which is the cover, and I was like, crap, like, because I was like, like, because they sent me a bunch of things. They were like, this is what we're thinking for the cover. Da, 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 da. And I saw this image of Josephine Baker. I was like, I think that's the cover. Like, I'm sorry, but I actually think that's the cover. And like I was telling you last night, it was interesting because publishing a book isn't just like a isolated thing. So you have publicity, you have marketing, you have the sales department, and you have the editorial department. I think if there's another department. I think it's several other departments, but it's departments. And everybody at those departments has a head and everybody has an opinion. And they send this to everyone. Like the cover goes to everyone and it's like, what do you think? And we were split, like, because we were like, they're both so gorgeous. And it was like, are we going for like a commercial appeal or are we going for the nonfiction editorial appeal? And for me, I was just like, this Josephine Baker is disgusting. Like disgusting in that way. I was like, this is nasty. I was like, I have not seen an image drawn like this in a very long time. And it gave me All Boys Aren't Blue, but it felt like the evolution of All Boys Aren't Blue with the cover that we have. I felt like that was like the evolution of the work. And so I was like, this is the cover. And trust me, they fought me on that too. Because they were coming back and forth with emails like, I don't know. Like, George is heavily leaning towards this, but Charlie drew this. And I was like, Josephine Baker's the cover. And I'm fine if y'all choose the other cover and I'll go out here and I'll talk about it. However, this is the cover. Like, what are we missing? This feels like the evolution of All Boys Are Blue. So it was a tough decision, but I think that's part of the work. Like, even writing it was tough. Everything about this book was tough, but it's like this was the first book that I wrote that wasn't about me. I'm a memoirist, and so even writing memoir, you're like, I'm writing about someone else's life too. This was like the first time where it was like, oh, I'm writing about their lives and having to include my life too. So what's the happy medium, even when it comes to the cover? But I felt like we found the happy medium because you gave us so many images. It just was like, I'm glad we chose the cover we chose.
I love the cover. I mean, I do love it, but at first I wanted to push
Yes.
back, and I'm like, I love it, right? So like, I love your writing. I love so many things about like what you do. I love the person, and it's very inspirational. You addressed it a little bit yesterday in our talk. When you put certain things on the title, on the cover, like queer, you immediately turn off certain people, right? But you're like, forget it. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, trusting that it's gonna work out. So, if you would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's not easy because like I remember when we were naming the book, and I was like, Flamboyants. Like the original name of the book was Spectacles in Color, which is based off of the Langston Hughes essay called Spectacles in Color, which talks about his first time going to a ball. If anybody's ever seen the show Pose, it was Langston Hughes' first time going to a ball, and he's one of the only people to have written about ballroom culture. And it was an essay written in 1929 that was part of his first memoir. And that's what I wanted it to be. But again, having a good lawyer, they will tell you very quickly, like, well, that's a lot of rights we're going to have to fight for. Because that name is owned by him, and we're going to have to go to the family. We would have to go through a whole lot of stuff. So give me another name. So I was like, all right. And so I came up with Flamboyants. But when we decided to have like a subtitle, it was tough because I was like, if I put queer on this cover, are people going to pick it up? Are people going to buy it? And I remember I went through the same thing with All Boys Aren't Blue. And I remember one of my first interviews when I did All Boys Aren't Blue, because it's called All Boys Aren't Blue, and then the subtitle is A Memoir Manifesto. One of the first interviews I had, a guy was like, you have a lot of audacity calling your book a manifesto. And I just remember, like, Marley been around since the beginning. I get very weird interviews. I get very weird reviews. There's a podcast coming out, I think this week, or I think it already came out. But the person who did the podcast, she was very nice on the podcast, but I just happened to go on Goodreads. Her review was not very nice, even though she was very nice on the podcast and acted like she loved the book. Her review that she put out publicly, I was like, oh, okay. Okay, I see you. And so that's kind of what goes into this world. Like I said, it's like putting out an album. And so Flamboyance, I was fine with. The queer Harlem Renaissance, I wish I knew, I was nervous about. Because I was like, if we put queer on the cover, are people going to buy it? And when All Boys Are in Blue, the back of the book says, be bold, be brave, be queer. And that was an intentional choice. The cover was an intentional choice because I remember, I was like, so for the book cover, I want something like da-da-da-da-da-da. And I remember they were like, well, authors don't usually choose the book cover. I was like, okay, that's fine. But this is what I want for my book cover. And I remember Grace was just like, okay. And was like, I'm going to call Charlie Palmer. And I was like, okay, this is what I want for the book cover. I want the book to be very queer from the book. Like, they don't judge a book by its cover. I was like, no, I want it to be judged. I want All Boys Aren't Blue to be judged. And in going through that process and watch how iconic the cover became, that's when I knew for Flamboyance, I was like, I want to go just as hard. And I don't want to be afraid of not making the list or not making things because I put queer on the cover. Because that's what I am. I'm queer from the cover. And the books that I write, I want to be judged by the cover.
Mhm.
I'm okay with that, right? People don't judge a book by its cover. It's like, no, judge my books by the cover.
Okay.
Because from jump, I want you to know what you're entering into. Just like you said, when you first saw All Boys Are Blue, it took you a second to be like, wait, what does that mean?
Yeah, it took me maybe a year, really. One day I'm like, oh, I get it, as opposed to immediately. But all right, so another question is, because reading Flamboyant, I've always been, and many of you are very familiar with the term passing, but it hit me at the point when I read it, I'm like, I never thought of that before.
Yeah.
There have been, in your world, so many people that have passed.
Yep.
And it was like, I never made the connection before. And so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I talk about passing in the book because one, passing is a thing that happened in my actual family. My great grandmother Gramsci used to be able to pass, and we were drunk. I know y'all like, wait, what? It was Christmas. Me, my mom, my brother, my family, we was drunk after Christmas dinner. And we called my Uncle Sam drunk. I don't know why we called Uncle Sam. I actually don't know why we called Uncle Sam because it was like midnight. Oh, I do know why. We were talking about family stuff. And we were like, call Uncle Sam because we know Uncle Sam know the answer. Mind you, Uncle Sam is 84 years old. He is my grandfather's brother, older brother. And so we call Uncle Sam and we tipsy / there. And we were like, hey, wasn't Grandma Jones biracial? Grandma Jones is my mother's grandmother. And so Uncle Sam picked up the phone like, what the hell are y'all doing up? Like, why are y'all calling me about Grandma Jones at midnight? And we're like, because we having a family argument. Was Grandma Jones biracial? And what we found out was that Grandma Jones was white, fully white. And he started explaining family stories to us at that point. And so one of the stories he told us was that when he was a little boy, him, my grandfather, and their younger brother, my Uncle Horace, they used to go down south to my great-great-great-grandmother's house in Mecklenburg, Virginia. And she was in her 90s when she was helping to raise them, but she was a slave until she was 11 because she was born in 1854. And they would go down there in the 1940s. And so what was crazy to me was, one, we had to tell Uncle Sam, like, Uncle Sam, you knew a slave? And he was like, I never thought about it like that. We were like, okay, keep telling the story. And so he told us the story, but basically my great-grandmother, Gramsci, what she used to have to do was she would pick them up from the south, and she would drive back north, but like maybe an hour from where she picked them up from in Lunenburg and Mecklenburg, she would park the car on the street. It was a very small city called Cambridge, and she would tell them to get under a cover, and they would get under a blanket, and they would lay in the back seat underneath a blanket, and she would get out the car, and she would walk about 2 or 3 blocks to her aunt's house, where her white aunts, because Grandma Jones was white, but my Gramsci could pass at night. Especially at night, she could pass. Mm-hmm. And she would walk there, and she would stay there for about 45 minutes to an hour. They'd give her some money and talk with her, but they knew she couldn't come in the daylight because she could be clocked a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so in already knowing that story, when I went into writing Flamboyants and started reading about passing culture, it made me think about not just the fact of like passing as a white person, as a black person, because that's something that actually happened in my family. It made me think about trans people and how trans people in our community sometimes have to do the same type of passing. How gay and queer people sometimes, like, I can't pass. I have a gay voice. So I could never pass, right? Like, I've always had gay voice. No matter how many muscles I put on his body, as soon as I open my mouth, you're gonna be like, oh, she's a girl. So I could never pass. But there are a lot of people who are queer or who are gay who do pass through straight society and get the privileges of being straight people and being heterosexual people because of their masculinity. And so passing to me, that's why I wrote it in the way I wrote it. Like, passing isn't just a black and white thing or a white and black thing. It is when you have to do what you have to do out of survival to survive in a dominant community.
Right.
And many of us have been there. And I think about, I couldn't pass, but if somebody was like, well, what was your passing story? My passing story was the fact that I had the best jumper on the block. So I didn't get picked last.
Really?
Yes.
You played
And if my
basketball?
brother was here, yes, they would all tell you, like, Matt, they call me Matt. They were like, Matt had the best jumper. And they would be like, Matt never got picked last. Like, as gay as Matt was, Matt never got picked last. Like, because everybody was like, but Matt can shoot from the furthest away. Like, Matt has the best three-pointer.
All right,
So
so
it's
I'm going to
like-
interrupt.
So that was my passing was sports. I was always good at sports.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what kept me connected to my cousins. It kept me connected to the boys because they were like, one, I was very knowledgeable about sports, but two, I was very good at sports. So I may not have gotten picked first, but I never got picked last. And that was like my way of like passing for survival, was that I made sure I was so good at sports that it was like, we know what you are. We ain't gonna say it out loud because you also have the best jumper.
All right, one more question, and I guess we can open the floor, and it might be even actually changing the topic a little bit, but not. A good example of passing, there's no way in hell professional male athletes. There's not a lot of gay men that are in, but but we also talked about, because I said yesterday, because I was also I love Langston Hughes, and everything I've ever read about him, he never addressed his sexuality, right? And so I was like, maybe he was asexual. And then you said yesterday that girls recognize girls. And so I'm always going to be curious. And I'll ask you later, who professional athletes do you know? No. Because, the sad truth when it comes to passing, I don't get it. If you're a great athlete, you're a great athlete. But
Right.
there's still this masculinity kind of thing that you have to carry on.
I think if this book hits the New York Times bestseller list,
When it hits.
when it hits the New York Times bestseller list, I think, yes. I think that's when, I have been NDA'd before. So, for those who know what an NDA is, I have been NDA'd before. When this book hits the New York Times bestseller list and I get that second one, I think that's when the NBA NDAs come. I think I'm like, once you get to a certain level, and people know that you're like publicly queer, like you know, and they're privately that, there is another type of culture that happens, especially at that level, where it's like, well, I don't want to lose my livelihood, even though this is who I am. There are, I think, 170 people in the NBA. I think it's 170.
That number sounds right.
Like, no, it's 11 on the roster. Or maybe it is somewhere around there.
That sounds right.
It's between 170 and 200 people in the NBA, like, that are actual players. Like, we know, like, just statistically, I think 1 in 4 is a person that identifies as queer. So it's like, do the math, carry the 1. Okay, 40 of y'all are queer. Somewhere around that, right? So it's like, well, 40 of y'all gotta be dibbling and dabbling. So, okay, like, because that's also part of like the alternative truth that is the United States, right? And that's why I write the way I write, because it's like we look at everything as a binary system in this country, right? The way we vote is binary. The way we do everything in this country is so binary, and it's like, but that can't be the truth, right? It's like, okay, if the school systems, Gen Z is saying basically 1 in 4 of us are queer. My generation, like, we keep looking at the numbers and the numbers and the numbers and the numbers, and then you get to Major League Baseball, and you get to the NFL, and you get to the NBA, and it's like, no, we're all straight.
Right.
And you're just like, okay. But then you get to the WNBA, and they like,
Right.
well, most of us are queer, right? So it's like, Okay, so it's like, or you get to women's sports and they're like, we are who we are. Like, this is our identity. This is how we roll. So it's like we know women's sports has been the much more radical in terms of saying I play this sport and this is who I am. Men's sports has not gotten there yet. We have a couple of people who, after the fact, have been like, "Oh, I'm gay" or "I'm queer." It's like, okay, so we know y'all do exist in the sports, but we just haven't gotten there yet. I do feel like that's a form of passing, and it's funny too because I feel like because the girls know the girls. Sometimes when they get on the post game interviews, I'm like. So we just going, okay. Like, and it's like, I'm not, like I said, one of the hardest parts about writing this book was trying not to out people. I don't want to out anyone. But I also know the danger in us treating culture the way that we treated Luther Vandross. And it was Patti LaBelle who finally was like, no, my friend, he was my best friend, and he was. Like, he was gay. And I remember how much heat she took for it. And they were like, why would she say that? She shouldn't have outed it. I'm like, but that man lived his whole life unable to be himself. Right. So we can't have it both ways where it's like, well, we shouldn't, quote unquote, tell people's truth. But also in hiding that truth, we harm another community. And when they asked her, why'd you say it? She said, because I don't want another male singer to go through what my friend went through.
Wow.
I don't want another generation of male singers to have to go through what my best friend went through. Right. And so that's part of it, right? Because he passed at a certain point, but he passed, and we also was like, now wait a minute, Luther, okay.
What does it take away from you? Because, I mean, like, to this day, there's not a greater singer, in my opinion, male singer. But, like, why would it change anything to find out that Luther Vandross?
Because he was someone that straight people made kids to. Oh. Right? Oh, I remember, like, I birthed my child, but it was like, but you've heard them say stuff like that, right? Yeah. Like, oh, I made love to your music. If they knew he was singing about men's, that changes everything, right? But that's part of like the problem with Black community at times. Because it's like, and I just had this conversation the other day. It was like somebody was basically saying like, yeah, we getting rid of Diddy, but I don't want to get rid of Keisha Cole Last Night, the song. And I was like, okay. First of all, you didn't have to tell us that. Like, girl, go listen to your song and like just don't say it out loud. But I remember one of the responses was like, y'all sound like what we went through with R. Kelly. But it was like, but the fact of the matter is, what we went through with R. Kelly was, y'all be talking about R. Kelly music, but if you knew who R. Kelly was attracted to, then you have to realize his music was talking about underage girls. So actually go check yourself, at some point, because it's like, age ain't nothing but a number. He wrote that, Aaliyah sang it, but he wrote it. So I think that's kind of like some of that work that we do where in our own community, it's like, oh, that's the uncle that's the uncle that we don't allow to be by himself with the kids. And it's like, well, why do you even allow him at the cookout at all? So yeah, I think a lot of it then becomes that work of how do we just be better as a community around these issues and around the things. Because it's like, and I've heard this said before, where it's like, I would rather my son be a killer than be gay. And that's nuts. I would rather my son had went to jail for murder than to come home and tell me he's gay. That's crazy, right? Like, that's nuts, right? And but when it's even crazier when writing this book and writing about somebody like Gladys Bentley, whose mother actually hated her because she was not a boy.
So that and the same thing. One of the things you address in the book, I don't want to give up too much, but the idea that Josephine Baker would reject her son when he comes out.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't understand that.
Yeah. That was one of the hardest, and again, it was hard for me to even read it. Like, to find out about it was, because it's like, oh, Josephine Baker, this would be a fun chapter to write. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I'm in my mind like, okay, when Beyonce came out in the banana skirt, did Deja Vu to Josephine, I was like, okay, this is going to be a fun chapter. And then I get through reading her life and reading her story and find out how homophobic she was. And I was like, wait, like, this makes no sense, because like I knew Josephine Baker, was bisexual, and so to find out she kicked her own son out and all of these things, and then I went and I literally found on YouTube the video of them honoring her in New York. I think it was 2021, and him being there and just talking about how he forgave his mother for what she had to deal with and what they went through. And I was just like, that's tough, because like even when we're in our own identity and we know our own identity, sometimes we reject others, mm-hmm. and sometimes we project to others. And so that was one of the harder stories for me to write, finding that out about her, because it's like, damn, sometimes even our heroes let us down.
And I think you addressed it a couple of times where there are gay closet men in the book that reject openly gay men.
Elaine Locke, one of our greatest philosophers, he didn't reject it because he was publicly queer himself, but he rejected effeminacy, like showcasing the feminine men. Right. He felt it still should look masculine. Wow. And so it was so many different opinions just about like, okay, we can talk about our queerness, but it can't be talked about like this. Mm. And Langston Hughes, so I told everybody yesterday, if Langston Hughes was alive, who would Langston Hughes be today?
Who would he be? You didn't say.
Wendy Williams.
Oh, you didn't say Wendy Williams.
Langston Hughes would have been Wendy Williams. And because he was messy, but truthful. Because even with everything we got going on in pop culture right now, it's like, Wendy Williams did say this 20 years ago. Like, the Diddy situation. Okay. I lived in Jersey when Wendy Williams got kicked out of New Jersey. I really got ran out of New Jersey because they were going to kill her. Because she was on the radio. She did what was called the Gay Rappers List. Ooh. And this was in the 90s. And she had to go to Philly. And so she started working at the Philadelphia radio station because she had the top radio show in New York. And every week she would release a new name of a gay rapper. And when Diddy's name popped on the list, I think it was like third or fourth week, maybe 4 or 5 weeks later, she had to leave. Literally, she left New York. She got fired and had to go to Philly. And then when she came back with Wendy Williams got the heat on Power 105, then her show became the top show and you couldn't stop her. But that's who Langston Hughes was. He was very messy, and he's in a lot of chapters in the book. So once you read the book, you can be like, wait, Langston Hughes was in this chapter too? It's like, yeah, he knew everybody's tea, and he was there for all of it.
So are there questions? Does anyone have questions?
So I've got a mic here so that folks who are listening on the live stream can, but yeah, I think we've got time for a couple of questions, and then we'll want to get started with the signing.
Sure.
Okay, so.
But you was like, in the end, yesterday with no questions, and
all of a sudden
started coming.
It was like, right, we ended up with 50 questions.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, obviously you did a lot of research. How are you going to take all of this knowledge that you built into further projects? Have they inspired you to want to write about a specific figure? And with that, are there people you had to cut and you want to give them? Because, it is a shorter book. Is there someone where you're like, I wish I could have really included this person or something like that?
Great question. Does it inspire me to do other projects? Yes. I do want to write about Stonewall. I do want to write about ACT UP and the HIV epidemic from the Black perspective, because both of those movements have been whitewashed in a way that's like, it's okay to include that white folks was there, because they were. Y'all was there. But, but it's like, I hate the fact that people are like, Marsha P. Johnson didn't throw the first brick. And it's like, okay, even if she didn't, she dropped a bag of bricks on a cop car the second night. She was literally the most radical chick out there for them 5 nights fighting the police. So whether she threw the first brick or not, she threw the first metaphorical brick. So I do want to write about different eras like that. The second part of your question was, yes, who had to get cut out? So originally when I wrote it, I included Nella Larson. Nella Larson wrote the book called Passing, which became the movie Passing, which had, I think, Tessa Thompson in it, and was an amazing movie. She wrote about queer identity. Like, one of the lead characters was a bisexual woman, and this book was written in, I think, 1929. So at a time when you really shouldn't have been able to, but this was like a huge book. And Elaine Locke literally was like, she's about to be our next person. Like, she's about to be the next greatest writer because the book is that amazing. And then Nella left. The whole movement, the whole community, she went and got, I believe she became a librarian and then just disappeared. And people think she went back to passing because she could pass herself. And people think she joined the Harlem Renaissance, like she became a black writer, whatever, and then got her degree and then decided to go back to passing. And there really isn't much about her life after like the 1930s. Like, because she just disappeared from the entire movement, from Langston, and she was known with all of them. And that was the one person who I was like, I wish I could include in the book, but it was just hard to verify her own queerness. It was like she wrote about it, but there was just no reports of it. Langston Hughes was hard too because there is actually 0 reports of him being queer, but he just, if you just got connected dots.
So Nella was,
Langston Hughes is a butch queen, so it's like you just had to connect the dots.
So Nella was passing and passing.
Yes, and she, right. So it's like that was the one person who I feel like, one, I would put in the book, but 2, I found was just super intriguing how she was just she just was a part of the life and then just kind of went away. And then County Cullen, who is in the book, I just found their 2 stories to be very, like, almost like symbiotic because, like, County Cullen kind of left the movement too. Like, he left and then just became an English teacher, but then became James Baldwin's 10th grade English teacher, which was my favorite. That's still my favorite fact in the book is County Cullen being James Baldwin's English teacher. Yeah.
I hope it's okay that I take it back to All Boys Aren't Blue.
Absolutely. It's banned books week. We could talk about it.
Okay, so I have read this, and I started frantically reading it again today.
I see, because it don't say New York Times bestseller on the cover, so it's an old copy.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's nice and dog-eared. But so my question, first of all, I can totally relate to the be bold and brave and queer because I actually wrote a book as well that I'm working on publishing right now called Bold, Brave Goddess, From Insecure Victim to Confident Survivor. And so I love that. And I'm sure that you've answered this question before, George, but just humor me here.
Yeah.
As a fellow author, I'm just curious as to your process in writing this book. Like, how long did it take you to write it? How long were the preparations for it? And how did you go about getting it published, if that's okay that I asked all that?
Yeah. All Boys Aren't Blue, such an interesting story. Originally, it was going to be an adult book, and I submitted okay, I'm a Scorpio, so deal with it. Something happened that made me get very petty. I can relate. Yes. A friend of mine got a book deal, and I saw them announce it. on Twitter, because I'm not calling it X. This was in 2018. And this was in 2018. It was January 2018, and they announced that they got a book deal. And I was sitting in my apartment, and I said, now, wait a minute. Now, I done wrote for Ebony, HuffPost, every magazine in this country. And ain't nobody gave me no fucking book deal. How the fuck you get a book deal before I get a book deal? This was my Scorpio talking. This is not my heart talking. And so I got very upset with myself that I did not get a book deal before one of my friends got a book deal, even though I had written for all these magazines before they had written for them. And that night, I sat there and I wrote the book proposal for All Boys Aren't Blue. Because I said, you know what? I'm going to get a book deal. I went on Twitter and looked at who was following me. And there happened to be a book agent following me. And I looked up what the submission process was for him. And I submitted a query letter saying, I want to write this book about my life because I went through this. And he emailed me back the next day immediately like, oh, this is amazing. Can you send me the proposal? I didn't know what a proposal was supposed to look like. So I was like, okay. So I created a proposal. I think the original book proposal, it had the first chapter where my teeth got kicked out. It had the chapter about Abraham Lincoln, and it had a chapter about my grandmother. That was the original book proposal. And the original name of the book was Smile, Black Boy, Smile. Submitted it. He literally emailed me back and was like, I've been crying this whole day thinking about what I just read. And like, yes, we're going to turn this into a book, but can you make it for young adults? I was like, well, absolutely, because I love the youth. I've been working with youth for a long time. And so that was what made me make the decision to make it a YA book. It took me over 2 years to write it because I had to find my voice. I was a journalist. My journalist voice, people knew my journalist voice. I used to be a columnist. I had a column that was called George is Tired. And every week I would write about what I was tired of. It's like one of my biggest articles was George is tired of gays for Trump. Because it just don't make sense. Listen, I want everybody to go vote, but that just made no sense to me. Like, y'all are carrying with that one. Because, like, he don't like you. Like, come on. Like, let's be for real. Right? But in writing All Boys Aren't Blue, it was like, it was hard because I had to find my voice. But it was a decision that I had to make to really go all the way there. The hardest part about writing All Boys Aren't Blue was I got the book deal March of 2018. I had to turn in the first draft July of 2018. I turned it in July 3rd of 2018, and then Nanny got sick July 21st of 2018. And so I had written her chapter differently because I thought she would be alive to be able to tour with me. And I wrote it in a way that was like, oh, this is going to be so cool because I'll get to travel the country with my grandmother and talk about what it was like to grow up with like a black grandmother that really loved LGBT people, because she really did. Like, she was actually pretty radical, especially as a church woman. She was pretty radical about the way she fervently fought for LGBT people. And when she got sick in 2018, and we found out it was a glioblastoma, we knew she wasn't going to make it to the time the book came out in 2020. So I had to rewrite the second half of the chapter, and I had to kind of write it from a space of being like, I know you're not going to be here when this comes out. But that's what I guess that's what book writing is. It's like, it's actually a living work. And I didn't realize how hard All Boys Aren't Blue was going to be until my brother died in 2022. Because then when people started asking me about the chapter about him, they don't know. And so it's like, damn, this book lives, because it's like the people in this book to people are characters. The people in this book to me are my family. And as they start to pass, I have to still talk about this book and talk about them. But you go from talking about them in the present to talking about them not here. So that's what I guess like writing the book was like. It was hard because once Nanny was passing, I was like, am I going to have to do this every time? Or like, is somebody going to pass before I'm done with this book and I have to rewrite something else? So it just became like a living piece of work. And even now, like it's almost 4 years later, I still have to talk about All Boys Aren't Blue, but it's not easy because I still have to talk about her, but now I have to talk about my brother. And as people in my family pass away, I'm still asked about them, whether it's email or this or that. So yeah, that was really what the process was. It wasn't easy. And as we're going through the years now of the book being out, it's even harder because they're getting older, and I think about mortality a lot more, because the book itself is immortal, and that's hard to balance that out.
Okay, so unfortunately, we're going to have to stop here. So we've
Sorry.
got time to sign books. But let's give our authors a big round of applause.